Good morning, students. Today we are going to discuss the name of English literature, the father of English literature language, Geoffrey Chaucer. Though his birth date is not clear and not known, but it is supposed that in 1343 he was born and in 1400 he died. Geoffrey Chaucer in English literature is a big name because he is a father of English literature language, and in fact he is the first who introduced English language in literature. Like in second slide, John Dryden was the man who called this who propounded this term father of English poetry, literature and language. John Dryden told him Geoffrey Chaucer as the father of English poetry. We should remark it, poetry, literature and language, means the entire English literature was started by Geoffrey Chaucer. The main points why he is called father of English poetry: language before Chaucer was Latin and French. Students, mark it, before Chaucer the language of poetry was Latin and French. Then Chaucer started writing when there was no proper English dialect. Remember it. When Chaucer started writing in English, then there was no proper English dialect. There was dialects, there was languages, different languages, but there was no proper English dialect when Chaucer started writing in English. Then, however, he was not the first poet. He was not the first poet in literature, but the first among the English writers. That's why he is known as father of English poetry. He was not the first poet in English literature. Remark it, not poet in literature, but the first among the English writers. He was the first writer who wrote in English. Then at that time, English people were interested in reading poetry, but poetry in their language, the language of the English, was not available. Before Chaucer, poetry was available. They read it, but they were interested, but reading poetry in English was not available before Chaucer. Now we have objectives of Chaucer. Chaucer was the first who gathered the vocabulary of the Middle English dialect and started writing poetry in it. Chaucer collected the Middle English dialects and he first started writing in English. Second point is, Chaucer introduces certain characteristics of English poetry as the footprint to follow. These are the footprints that made him father of English poetry, and the development in the English poetry was, first, the footprints were rhyme. What is rhyme? Rhyme is choosing the similar words while writing poetry. This is rhyme in Chaucer's poetry. Then rhythm. The continuation of a sound effect or pattern is known as rhythm in Chaucer's poetry or in English poetry. Like there is example, choosing the similar words while writing poetry. Rhythm, the continuation of a sound effect or pattern. Mind it, continuation of sound and pattern. Like when that April with this source suit. Here te, then come hath proceed to the root, again te, and bathed every vein in which liquor you are, of which virtue ingered in the floor you are. This is the rhythm pattern or sound pattern that is called rhythm in Chaucer's poetry. Now comes stanza. The paragraph in the poetry is known as a stanza. Then comes journey to gain the title Father of English Poetry. As we know, John Dryden coined this term and called him the father of English poetry. Then what was the certain criteria which makes him Chaucer as father of English poetry? Then, firstly, Chaucer introduced the English language to the world. He was the first who introduced English language to the world. Chaucer was the first who introduced the English language to the world. However, most of the works were includes in Latin and French. उससे पहले जितने भी थे वे Latin and French में लिखे जाते थे. Secondly, Chaucer was the first who combines the oral tradition of storytelling into written form. This is very remarkable that he was the first. एज वी नो हम लोग अपने दादी से, नानी से और ऐसे बहुत सारे स्टोरीज हैं जिनका रिटन फॉर्म में कहीं कोई जिक्र नहीं है, बट चॉसर स्टार्टेड these types of oral tradition, oral telling of stories into written form. This is very remarkable point that he was the first, Chaucer was the first who combines the oral tradition of storytelling into written form. Thirdly, he had the capability to write poetry by introducing the basics of writing poetry in English. Means he was the first who started writing poetry in English by rule and regulations. Before him, the writings were in manuscripts or like this oral tradition was there in oral form. The stories were in oral form, but after the coming of Chaucer, all the stories were combined into a written form with the rule and regulations of grammar. That's why he is known as the father of English poetry. In next class, we will discuss about the other works of Geoffrey Chaucer. Thank you.